How far beyond the tipping point are we? Or before the tipping point are we?
QUO presents Hybrid Lives with David Keen.
Riccardo Tessaro, good morning, in London, good afternoon from Bangkok. Welcome to the QUO mini-series on hybrid lives and hybrid spaces. This is our fourth episode, Riccardo, and we're very honored to have you as our guest. Thank you for joining me.
Good afternoon to you, David. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be here now today with you guys.
Great, thank you so much. Riccardo is the CEO and co-founder of Gravity CoLiving, an innovative, compelling reimagination of short-term, let's say, apartment rental. It's a company called Gravity CoLiving based out of London. Riccardo, tell us a little bit how you started.
Yeah, well, first of all, my background was in real estate before. I was actually living in Asia for a few years before I set up Gravity in London. The reason why we started, we had a few drivers. The main drivers were, the fact that demand for rental accommodation was changing, specifically when looking at our target demographic being young professionals. We felt like the only option that were given to people was either short-term stays, so one night to 90 nights, or 12 months contracts on typical residential rental agreement. Everything in between was sort of not available, and the demand for that kind of length of stay, so anything between 3 to 12 months, was on the rise. So that was really the main driver. The second driver was the fact that because of the amount of people working remotely and freelancers, people wanting flexibility and the ability of working from home a couple of days a week, we felt like people are just they just wanted a very all-inclusive sort of approach to rental. So without having to waste time on paying utilities, paying council tax, or any sort of tax you might have. And most importantly, they were craving that sense of community, which often is lacking in the life of a young professional when you're working, long hours. So that was really the reason why we decided to start. Of course, from a real estate perspective, we saw a shift from in terms of appetite from institutional investors. We saw that a few years ago, a lot of them were looking at the alternative sectors, mainly focusing on 2 or 3 asset classes, being student accommodation, service office, or service apartment. And now, in the past 2-3 years, we've seen a lot of demand and increasing appetite towards the residential sector in general, and more specifically in what we're doing, which is build to rent or co-living, if you will.
And how and why? Well, how much has COVID influenced your business, question one? And following up, COVID, I'm guessing from what you're saying, was a catalyst of change, but the needs of the generation of the consumer, or the renter, or so to speak, the person that's interacting with the Gravity brand, had already changed and has been changing for some years. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that overall the dynamics have changed in the rental market in the past few years. And I think, as I explained briefly earlier, we have a very specific target demographic with Gravity. We target typically professionals between 20 and 35, 40 years old. And, we just saw, typically in London, if you sign up for an apartment, you sign up for a 12 months contract, a typical ASD. Your other only option is to sign up to stay on a short-term stays with Airbnb or hotels or service apartment, which is great. But people today really want that flexibility of being able to sign up for 6 months, 5 months, 9 months, and being able to break the contract with not 6 months notice, but with a month notice or 2 months notice, which is exactly what we're offering. So to summarize it, I think that the one thing that is really changing the whole scene in the rental accommodation market, at least in London, or I think in cities like London globally, is the demand for highly flexible and all-inclusive, hassle-free sort of rental contracts, which is what we're doing here at Gravity.
And how much does this coincide with the trend and the need for hybrid spaces and a co-living, co-working environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also a very good point. We see a lot of the members we have at Gravity here in London demanding, especially in the past 12, 18 months, a lot of people demanding, home office solutions. So we provide additional furniture rental for them on top of the communal areas we have in all our buildings, which basically allow them to work from all of our buildings. So of course, it's something that I think the ability of offering even a small co-working space within a residential or mixed-use development today, it's definitely an advantage from a selling perspective.
Surely that's just the beginning, to have some form of co-working space, some form of social space, which I understand you have within the 4 units, the 4 buildings that you're operating in London. But won't the interior space evolve more so that social or co-living, co-working space will actually become more important than the unit itself? Or are we going on a reverse path?
I mean, I think the social element of our co-living offering or of a general residential offering today, it's very, very important, especially post-pandemic or during the pandemic. The fact of not necessarily having huge social spaces and amenity space within the buildings, but being able to organize events and activities inside and outside of our buildings for our community, it's very, very important. And people are just craving that social element in the offering. So that's really key. And obviously, COVID accelerated the demand for this type of spaces and this type of solution.
But incremental engagement, I mean, I know you've talked about a little bit to me privately about community, but also within the spaces, both you're saying inside and outside, you've got some sort of community leader. And I don't want to make this a sales job about Gravity. I really don't, because our listeners are really not interested. I'm not, but the point that I want to make is how incrementally more important is that changing space and those changing needs of the consumers or of the users that the users that are engaging with your apartment buildings?
I mean, they're essential. They're not just important. Like they need, our members, they need a space for them. They need a private space where they can have their own privacy, and they can be on their own or with their girlfriends or their friends. And they need a social space where they can interact with other people. Bear in mind that a lot of the people we have and deal with are very mobile. So they move from one city to the other. They don't really have that much time to go out and socialize with people because they're working long hours. And typically, if you stay in a traditional residential apartment with no social or amenity space within the building, or no community focus from an operational perspective, it would be very hard for someone to actually interact with people and socialize and have a social life. So I think that's really very, very important in the offering, and that's something that pretty much all our members require. And also from a working perspective, obviously post-COVID and during COVID, most people have been got used to working from home. Some have been more lucky than others with the setup they had at home. And what we're trying to do is really to try and make it very easy for them to switch from a private home space within the building to a more social shared space within the building where they can not just work, but socialize with other members.
You talk about members. Can you that may be a brand thing, or it may have more depth to it. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I mean, it started as a brand thing, but eventually, I didn't mention this to you, David, last time we met, but basically what we're looking to do now, what we realize is that a lot of the people living with us or that have lived with us in the past, once they move out, they still want to be part of our community because they enjoy the social aspect of it, the community aspect of it. They want to have access to all the perks and discounts that we offer via the mobile application that we have, and so on and so forth. And they want to have access to the events that we organize. So what we're doing now, we're looking to open a physical space in central London, which will be used as an event space, and a co-working space for all our members, regardless of which building they live in London. Sort of, yeah, just smaller scale, I would say, but something that it's accessible by any of the members living with us or any of the members that have lived with us in the past and have moved out. And basically, exactly. So we're calling it a social membership. So everyone that has left a Gravity building is entitled to become a social member and effectively have access to the spaces, have access to the community, and have access to all the perks and events that we organize. So we definitely don't call them tenants. We would call them customers or members. Like, we don't see someone staying with us as a transaction of 6 months. The average stay with us is about 7 months now. So we don't see someone stay with us for 6 months and then that's it. But we have about 30% of people staying with us that end up renewing or moving out and then eventually moving back in, or that move out, they get their own apartment with their friends or their girlfriends and so on, but they still want to have access to all the perks via the social membership that we're offering. So that's something we're launching Q2 this year.
So it is very much a brand thing. It's a need, and it talks very much to the generation to whom you're talking, this need to belong. And obviously that's a brand thing, and you want, and I understand, and you want your members to belong to so to speak, the Gravity community. How much are you seeing, Riccardo? How much are you seeing a change in your members' mental health or degree of loneliness, degree of need for human connection, for a degree of need for being together, and how much is that a function of a need to belong?
I mean, the need of human interaction and the craving of community, that feeling of belonging and being part of something bigger, it's something that we've seen pre-pandemic, but it has been accelerated significantly during the pandemic in the past 24 months. As a matter of fact, when we first started Gravity, one of the issues that we wanted to tackle was specifically urban isolation within large cities like London. It's an epidemic, unfortunately, today, especially in the demographic we have of young professionals working in tech, finance, real estate. We have a lot of creatives staying with us. Most of the times, people working very long hours don't really have time to socialize and have a good social life, especially if they're moving around often from city to city. So I think it's, from a demand perspective, being able to do something about it and tackle this issue obviously makes it very appealing from a potential member's perspective. And from our perspective, it's just something that we really believe in, and we think it's essential to really elevate the rental offering in cities like London.
Yeah, it's actually super interesting, and it's without undermining the devastation or the horrible elements of being lonely or of needing to socialize, and the consequences, let's say, of COVID. I think it's a synthesis of the generation as well. I think it's a synthesis of the generation that is growing up right now, and their fragility in terms of their mental health and their needs for socialization. And it's, as you say, quite rightly say, it's something that definitely has been happening over the last few years, but has been unfortunately horribly accelerated by COVID. And it's interesting how business models are adapting are adapting and reacting to that, and obviously not leveraging it or taking advantage of it, but you can see that it's a need that has to be filled.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, we always speak to our members at Gravity. We have a regular, I mean, our community managers, they would have regular meetings with the community in all our buildings, and we just see how much our members, our customers appreciate all the efforts that we put in to really make a difference from a community and social perspective. And it's just something that I think every residential offering, any rent operator of residential buildings should focus on, because it's just it's needed.
I want to grow the conversation a little bit further and understand first where you think the need for hybrid spaces is a function of the younger generation, because you obviously got, you know, several hundred people who are living with you and their needs, and how that's going to impact the overall rental market within, for example, London or other big cities. How far beyond the tipping point are we? Or before the tipping point are we?
Yeah. I mean, I think the main fundamental issues that we have today in the rental market, I see three big issues specifically in the rental market. One is the fact that, you know, you don't really have many institutional or professional landlords in the market. So a lot of the available residential space to let, it's very poorly managed, and often the quality of the fit out is very poor. Yet it comes at a very high price. Number two, I think, you know, the sort of contracts, the typical contracts being offered to tenants today in London or the UK in general, but I think this is happening throughout Europe, is just the contracts are too long term. So there's no flexibility whatsoever. The typical AST contract in London is a 12-month contract. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you might get a break clause after 6 months, but that's as much flexibility that you get. But I think this is also obviously making it very, very hard for people that are looking for something flexible, which is the majority of people my age, or, you know, within our target demographic. This is what they want, and they can't get it in London. The other issue we see here is that there's a lot of short-term stays operator focusing on sub 2 months or sub 1 month stay, taking over residential buildings and running them as hotels effectively, which means that again, the stock of residential units being available for the mid to long stays, it's gone. Like a good percentage of the stock is not available anymore, which makes it even harder for people to find suitable accommodation. So I think there's a lot of issues in the market today in London. I'm talking about London. I'm not talking about other maybe regional cities in the UK. And I think we're definitely seeing some changes when it comes to flexibility with operators like us, and there's similar operators offering a bit more flexibility. In terms of regulation, when it comes to short-term stay operators, I mean, it's illegal, but yet everyone does it. So I don't understand what's going on there. But I think it's important for regulators to look into this in more details. And I think overall, the PRS market in general is becoming very hot at the moment. Like the whole build-to-rent market is becoming very hot, which means there will be more professional landlords in the market, which means the quality of accommodation will improve overall. So I think things are slowly changing, and I think we're getting to that tipping point you were referring to earlier.
But are developers creating now, or developing, so to speak, for the needs of the generation, or are they developing for the needs of their pockets?
Well, I mean, I would say the majority of developers are developing for their needs of their pockets. But there, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of there's a lot of very good products that we're seeing coming up in the market in London of specifically, developments that are designed for the young generation of the rental generation, let's say. And I think the way that these buildings are designed, it's really tailor-made for our target demographic, which is good. The issue there might be affordability, which is not necessarily, they're not. I've seen some of this, some of the offerings in the market today, and I have to say they're not necessarily the most affordable solutions in the market. But unfortunately, in cities like London, if you want to have, a quality landlord, a quality building, good, design-led product with a good operator on board, it's very tough to get an affordable solution.
Let's switch a little bit, and I'm sure you're familiar with the inevitable, even though the government yesterday or today, actually, I guess, announced that they're going back, that they're no longer recommending working from home, and offices will be, or should now be, populated and occupied again. What we're seeing in different parts of the world is that those offices are being less populated today, even after a mandate to return to work, than they were pre-pandemic. And that there's, as another core acceleration, and speaking to hybrid work, so to speak, or hybrid, as a hybrid workspace, the need for office space fundamentally is changing. How do you see that evolving in London? What does that mean for commercial, and what does that mean for commercial real estate in London?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Demand for office space is obviously not as strong as it used to be, especially if you take places like, the city or the financial hubs in London. They're definitely not in high demand as they used to be. Obviously, from our perspective, we see big opportunities there. We're actually working now on a project in Canary Wharf, which is a large office conversion, and we see that sort of product to be we think it's a very suitable conversion to what we're looking to create at Gravity, right? So I think that's good for us. Overall, long term, I think there'll be more and more office conversions in the market. I think retail as well will be converted. A lot of the small, mid-sized shopping malls in city center locations, they haven't had a very good time in the past few years, with retail being at a low point. And I think there's an opportunity there as well too. I see there was a large shopping mall in Bayswater in London, Queensway. I forgot the name now, but I know that that's now being converted to residential, for instance, and I think this is going to happen more and more going forward. So I think it's overall it's good, because obviously there's a chronic undersupply of housing in cities like London, and just being able to convert existing stock of office and retail space into residential, it's a win-win for everyone, in my opinion, and it's also a very sustainable way to add stock to cities like London.
And do you see that again? I mean, talking about tipping points, I mean, that's a massive, massive difference. And obviously real estate, as everyone knows, in London, there are a few cities in the world where the price per square foot or price per square meter of any real estate is more expensive than London. And you're talking about converting a piece of commercial real estate in Canary Wharf. Is that being done out of need by the developer because they just can't fill the space, or is that economically the wisest thing for them to do?
I think it's a combination of both. It's hard for them to fill up the space today in today's market, and economically it makes more sense for them from a pounds per square footage perspective once the conversion is done.
Right. It's really, I mean, when we talk about the elevation and what's really interesting is that there'll be some sort of a transformation towards hybrid residential working spaces, where, to my point that I was making earlier in the conversation, where I believe that you'll be creating a greater combination perhaps of work, social, living spaces within these buildings, rather than just a sort of social area where you might be able to work, where there will be the buildings themselves will become maybe more complex or more utilized, or in some of the other people I've spoken to, is more multidimensional. So a working space can become a social space that could also become a living space.
Yeah, no, I mean, we are absolutely of the idea that it's important to have the right mix of social, social spaces and different types of spaces within our buildings. But we also think it's important to use, for instance, our co-working space is used as a co-working during the day, and it becomes a dining area at night for our residents. So they can organize communal dinners amongst them. And this is, by the way, it's a very successful way to build communities, to have these communal dinners. And that you don't need to have specifically a dining room to be and rent it out to your members. So I think the fact that we can use, or people can use spaces for different purposes, it's very important. That's I definitely see that as the way forward for at least for us at Gravity. Yeah, so I think that's sort of our position, being able to utilize the space in different ways.
If we take this model, and this is my last question because we are actually out of time, but if we take this model and project it into the future, and you very clearly have articulated your demographic in pure branding terms, as I think we talk about typologies rather than demographics. Although in this case, I'd probably talk about some sort of a hybrid, so to speak, not wanting to use the word hybrid again, but a hybrid demographic typology. So, as you said, sort of the peripatetic, young, urban professionals that are looking for short-term rent. But there's multiple typologies within this, within the needs or people who are looking for apartment rental. Do you see, apart from your own project, your own product, do you see a need within other typologies / demographics, different types of spaces growing as time goes on, so that we have as we do with hotels, you've got budget, high-end, mid-end, whatever, sports hotels, all the rest of it. Do you see a variation in terms of the possibilities of types of buildings that are going to be developed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I have been involved recently, I'm very early stage on a project, for instance, that it's a co-living space it's a mixed-use development. Effectively, there will be a hotel component, office component, residential component, but this is specifically designed and will be created specifically for the scientific industry. So researchers, scientists, and so on. So everything will be designed around them for their needs. So that's one example. Of course, if you look at other demographics, if you look at demographics instead, that we think a specific tailor-made product could be made for young families, which is something that we're not targeting today, for instance. A specific tailor-made product could be made for people retiring, which is something that already people are doing, and it's definitely gonna become bigger and bigger as a sector. I think this sort of approach, with a few tweaks left and right, can be adapted to many different demographics. You start with university students going to purpose-built student accommodations. They move out, they want to have a similar sort of offering, so they move into a co-living. Then eventually they want to have PRS product, and eventually they start working, they might have single family homes, but again with a very good 360-degree operational perspective and offering. And then eventually you have the product for retired people, which is again another something that it's up and coming these days.
Right, and kind of exists, but it's I think there's a super huge growth in that area. Riccardo Tessaro, I want to say thank you so much for being a part of our series, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom on what's happening in co-living spaces and hybrid spaces. We wish you a very happy new year and all the very best for your business for the future. Thanks, Riccardo.
Thank you so much, David. It was absolutely a pleasure to be here, and hope I'll see you soon in London.
I hope so too. Cheers.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.